So I heard a few of you laughing at that, which just means you're human, right? We like to laugh when other people mess up. Why is that? I think it's because we realize we're not the only ones that do stupid things, right? Or am I alone? Okay, if you can, say with me, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I do stupid things. Just say it out loud. My name is Ben, and I do stupid things. There we go. All right, we got it out of our systems. We're calling this next series of teachings, these next 4 weeks, Fail Forward. And we're going to learn a little bit about life from a man called Simon Peter. And I wanted to talk about this because we're often afraid to do things because we might fail, right? I learned a long time ago that it's better to try stuff in life and fail spectacularly than to do absolutely nothing. So that's what we're hoping we can learn, especially when it comes to our faith, through a man by the name of Peter. But before I get into that, there's a couple things on your program every week. There's a place to take some notes, and we encourage you to do that, to look some things up by yourself later or with somebody else. And then in the lobby at the Life Desk this morning, we've got this. Every series that we start, we provide study guides that goes with all of the different weeks' teachings. It helps you get deeper into the scriptures than I'm able to do in the 20 or 25 minutes. Unless Rick's preaching, it's like 35 or 40 minutes, so I've heard, that we've got here. I can make fun of him because he's not here, and you're not going to tell him, right? But please get into these things and learn some things on your own or with others. Now, we're going to learn from Peter. And Peter, just so you know, is kind of a big deal. If you are a church person, been raised in the church, you've heard the name Peter many times. Even if you're not a church person and you have no clue who he is, you've probably at least heard his name when somebody starts a joke that says, St. Peter is at the pearly gates, right? We talk about somebody's dying, going to heaven. That's the Peter that we're talking about. And in the Gospels, he's a big deal. In the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in your New Testament, Peter is mentioned 200 different times. All the other apostles, just so you know, are mentioned 50 times combined. John, in his Gospel, I love the way John describes himself. He says that he is the one that Jesus loved. And John is only mentioned 18 times. So Peter must be a big deal. What you're going to realize over the next few weeks is Peter's kind of a big deal because Peter is brash and prone to sticking his foot in his mouth and jumping and failing, miraculously actually surviving these things. But to understand more about that, I want to give you some of Peter's backstory today. Anytime you read the Bible, you just need to know that context matters. And often it's hard to fully understand what you're reading until you get a better sense of in between the lines. It's hard to understand something about Peter if you just read a verse or a series of verses that's that long on a piece of page of your Bible. So we're going to unpack him a little bit more this morning. Now, Peter's original name is Simon. He would have been known as Simon Bar Jonah. And in ancient Hebrew, they often referred to somebody as Bar something. Bar meaning the son of somebody. So he is Simon. His dad's name was Jonah, not Jonah the whale Jonah, but just another Jonah. I guess it was a popular name back then. So they grew up in a town called Bethsaida, which is on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. And in your New Testament, a lot of the events take place around the Galilee there. Bethsaida itself is a word that actually translates to the house of fishermen. It was a fishing village, and most people that lived there, it was all about the fishing industry. Simon had a brother by the name of Andrew. They lived and they worked with their dad. It would have been a family trade to fish. Eventually, Peter gets married. He and Andrew actually relocate to a town not far away called Capernaum, and that's where he settles down to make a living for his family, doing what he's always done, fishing. That's just who he is. And now I want you to use your imagination just a little bit, because I want you to imagine the type of guy that Peter is like. Peter is the type who would fish, and they don't fish like we do. You go out on the bank or on a boat with a rod and a reel. Fishing then is more commercial, and that's done with nets, big, heavy nets that they would throw out in the water. And these nets, they were circular. They could be 9 feet in circumference or wide or even bigger. And on these nets would have had metal around the edges or lead to kind of weigh them down. And what they would do is they would go out and they would throw these nets out into the water, and they would haul them back in and throw them back out and haul them back in and throw them back out and haul them back in over and over and over, night after night, day after day. So, can you imagine what Peter's hands looked like? Can you? Were they like pastors' hands? Yeah, because we pastors, we don't do a lot of physical stuff. Were they manicured? Were they well kept? Probably not, right? You can imagine what his hands would be like. But what about other things? Can you imagine what sort of guy he was? Now, here's the thing, is he was religious, of course. Everybody then was raised in a religious structure, but he wasn't the smartest. He didn't go to the synagogues. He didn't learn. He wasn't a teacher, so he was nominally religious at best. So when you're out fishing and hanging out with the guys, I would almost imagine they probably told some sort of jokes. Do you think they were nice little knock-knock jokes? Or fishing jokes? Do you think they ever told fish lies? I swear it was this big. What sort of Peter is this guy? And when he's done fishing, what does he do? He and the guys, they go hang out? If they do, where do they go? What do they drink, right? Does he drink Diet Coke or lemonade or tea? Or, does he have a cold beer with his buddies? Well, cold is relative back then, because I guess there weren't refrigerators, right? Wine? I'm imagining that's the case, because that was just life back then. Are you getting a picture of who Peter is? Before we called him Saint Peter. This is Peter. A simple life that he lived, a regular guy, kind of the salt of the earth. And this is how Peter was until he met Jesus. And then changes started to happen. And so one day, I want to kind of set this up. Jesus shows up at a place where John the Baptist is. And maybe you've heard the name John the Baptist. John was Jesus' cousin. And he would go out and he would baptize people and he would prophesy. He would tell people that there is this Messiah that's to come. And Jesus all of a sudden shows up one day, and John looks to Andrew, which is Peter's brother, and he says, Andrew, you know who I've been talking about all this time? That is him. That is the Messiah. You should go follow him. And so Andrew does. He goes and he meets Jesus, and then he goes to find his brother, Simon. He'll be Peter in a little bit. But it's Simon. And he's like, Simon, I've met the Messiah, and you've got to meet this guy. And so Simon, he goes and does this, and he is impressed. And whenever Simon meets Jesus, after a dialogue, Jesus gives him a new name, a nickname. In fact, in the Bible, there's all sorts of nicknames. Jesus named many of his apostles. We know a few of them, like James and John. They were called the Sons of Thunder. That's like so NASCAR before NASCAR. Sons of Thunder, how cool is that? And then when he talks to Simon, this is what he says. He says, now Jesus looked at him and he said, you are Simon, the son of Jonah, but now you will be called Cephas, which translates stone or rock. Cephas, that's not a cool name, right? Hey, Cephas. No, that's the Hebrew version. Now, in the Greek, it's translated to Petros, which is where we get Peter. But he was the rock before the rock. You know what I'm talking about, right? You can smell what I'm cooking, right? Man, you guys, come on. Peter, he's like, cool, I'm the rock. And that's what he becomes. In fact, he gets to be known eventually as the rock from which the church was built. And if you're raised Catholic, Peter then becomes the very first pope. So Peter has a strong presence throughout our faith, and it starts with this day that Jesus says, all right, Simon, I'm giving you a new nickname. Now, I'm going to fast forward about a month and a half, because after that happens, one day, Peter, he goes to Jesus, and he asks Jesus if he can come to his house and pray for his mother-in-law, who's very sick. And notice, he actually asked Jesus to pray for his mother-in-law. So that's a challenge to all you married folk. Pray for your mother-in-laws. Some of you start laughing because you know what I'm talking about. But he asked Jesus, come and pray for my mother-in-law. She's very sick. And this is what it says in the book of Matthew. It says, when Jesus had come to Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed. She was ill and she had a fever. So he reached down and he touched her hand and the fever left. And then she rose and busied herself serving them. Now, I don't know why she instantly got up and started like making them egg rolls or something, but she did. She started to serve them. But here's the thing, is this is one of the first instances, one of the very first moments where Peter connects with Jesus in ministry and a healing takes place, especially one that is directly connected to Peter. Now, it's said that after that encounter, Jesus stayed with Peter for a while, stayed there at his house. We don't know exactly why he did, but I suspect it's because after that moment, he knew something about Peter that Peter didn't know about himself. And there was something in store, and so he stayed there to invest in Peter's life a little bit more, because there's going to be a change that would happen in him that would lead to a change in others that would ultimately lead to us here today. And I believe it started after that moment with Peter's mother-in-law. And so when Peter, Jesus sees just this regular guy, he can see us the same way, a regular girl, I'm not judging here. No matter who you are in our lives, you can be recognized by Jesus. He sees your gifts and your treasures. He even sees your flaws, your mistakes, your love handles, and all those things. That's who Jesus is. Peter's story, what you're going to start to see, is our story. So I want to get back to the story. Peter and his brother Andrew, one morning, they're on the shore there, the Sea of Galilee, and they've been out all night fishing. And they're there, they're cleaning their nets. They're getting things packed up so they can go back out the next night. But on this particular night, they didn't catch anything, which is why they call it fishing, right? Because if you caught stuff all the time, they call it catching. That's just mine. But they're there, they're cleaning up their nets, they're trying to put their gear away, and Jesus shows up. And with Jesus is this crowd of people, and Jesus walks straight to Peter and gets in his boat and says, hey, Peter, do you mind coming with me? Let's push this boat out a little ways so that I can get out onto the lake and I can speak to people. I can get away from the crowd. I can speak to them. They can hear me. And I can imagine at the moment what Peter probably was thinking. He's probably thinking, Jesus, really? Are you serious, dude? I mean, come on. I've been up all night. I've been fishing. And on top of that, it was a bad night. I didn't catch a thing. And now you want me to get in my boat. You want me to go out so that you can preach. You essentially want me to go out and make this church service happen. Dude, I'm tired. I'm smelling. My hands hurt. It's time for bed. But he doesn't say that. He just gets in the boat. He takes Jesus out a little ways. And so here's Peter, and there's Jesus in the boat. And Peter does something to make sure the boat doesn't move so that it's stationary, and he's sitting there. Jesus has his back to him, and he's addressing the crowd right there in front of him. And here's the thing, is Peter is there right in the middle of this church service. Jesus is preaching. Peter can't even fall asleep. Why? Because all the people out there, some of which are asleep, right? They're watching Jesus, who's like right here, and guess where Peter's sitting? Right here. And everybody can see him. So he has to sit there and pretend to be interested to whatever Jesus is preaching about, to pretend to be awake. And I bet all he could think of at the time is, man, I'm tired and I want to go home. I want to pause and recognize something that I think Jesus is doing here. Because I bet you're a little bit like me. My tendency when it comes to doing anything in life is I can do it myself. I think it's part of our American DNA, the rugged individual. I don't need any help. I can do everything for myself. But do you know one of the best ways to actually meet somebody or to develop a friendship or to lead somebody? You know one of the best ways to do that? Is to ask for help. Hey, can you help me move this thing? Or, hey, can I get a cup of sugar? Can I borrow your boat? I think that's what Jesus is doing here. And because, let's face it, he didn't really need Peter, right? I mean, he's Jesus. He can speak to people in any sort of way. He could have rode himself out there, but he's like, hey, Peter, why don't you help me out? Give me a hand here. I think this is another attempt for Jesus to pull Peter into ministry. And Jesus knows, you know, and I know you're cleaning your nets and you didn't catch anything and you're probably tired, but can you just take me out a little ways? And Peter's like, sure, I can do that. So here's something from this part of the story is I believe Jesus calls all of us, and I also want you to know this, Jesus likes to borrow our stuff. Did you know that? He does. Jesus likes to borrow your stuff, whatever it is you have, your skills or your abilities. He even likes to borrow your money, by the way. If you got a boat, he can borrow that, which, by the way, I've heard the best 2 days of ever owning a boat is the day you buy it and the day you sell it. Any boat owners know that one? Yeah, he likes to borrow what you have. Notice he didn't ask Peter to build a platform for him to stand on to get high enough. Why? Because he's not a carpenter. Peter doesn't know how to do that. But he knows how to fish. He has a boat. So Jesus says, dude, can I borrow your boat? You see, Jesus calls us to accomplish his mission in a bunch of different ways. And most of the time, he does it with whatever it is you have. Often we don't think we can actually do anything for Jesus because we don't think we're qualified at all. And in fact, I've heard pastors call it this way. You know what? Jesus doesn't ever call those who are qualified. He qualifies the people that he calls. Where I'll put it a different way. If you feel Jesus nudging you to do something, guess what? He has already taken into account that you're not qualified and you have messed it up already. He knows all that. And yet he still asks. I know this is true because for me to do what I do, to speak to people like you based on my own ability or my own intellect or charm or whatever it is I have, I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. So let me ask you. What is your boat? What is your boat that Jesus can use? And are you letting him use it? Or maybe you hear something or you feel something and you find yourself saying more like, really, Jesus, I'm tired. Jesus, I'm a little overcommitted. I don't have the time. Jesus, can you find somebody else, please? There's got to be somebody better than me. See, I think we hear Jesus all the time, but we're really good at tuning them out. In fact, I know we hear Jesus all the time, especially those of you who come to church here or somewhere else. I bet, I don't know how many hundreds of times many people going to church have heard that, hey, you know what? There's this opportunity to help these people out in the community or the children at the church. You hear all sorts of opportunities, and that's Jesus saying, dude, can I borrow your time? And often we're like, no. Or you're reading your Bible and you see something in there and you're like, man, this is kind of speaking to me. I need to go share this with somebody. Or maybe I need to live this out. That's Jesus kind of giving you that nudge. You hear from him. Or maybe you see somebody and there is an obvious need and you feel that feeling to do something. That's Jesus wanting to borrow you. And here's the thing. Be honest, sometimes you feel that nudge and you're stretched to the max. You're like me. You have very little time in your schedule. And you're tired, you've been working all day or talking to people all day long, and Jesus comes up and has the gall at the end of your day to say, hey, Ben, I need you to do something for me. And you're like, oh, Lord, really? Listen, that's you. I feel you. As a pastor, I'm a little embarrassed to tell people this. There are days I just don't feel it. There are days I don't want to do this. Because there's only so much life to give, right? So many hours in the day and so many days in the week. And you guys, you're just like me. We get tired. But more often than not, I get like Peter. And even though I'm tired, my inner teenager rolls its eyes and sighs and begrudgingly says, okay, Jesus, sure, whatever. Right? Come on, am I the only one? Begrudgingly, we say yes. And here's what I found. Whenever we do that, even when we do something begrudgingly, there is something that happens in the midst of that. Even though I do something begrudgingly, more often than not, God reveals something new to me or about me And what I start to find is often when I feel God nudging me to do something for somebody else and I don't feel like it, what he's really doing is something for me that I need. That's what happened. So Peter, in this moment, he's there in the boat, and this is what happens next. Jesus finishes preaching, and he says to Peter, hey, Peter, let's go a little bit further out, and let's cast nets again out into the deepest water. And this is kind of interesting to me, because when you read this account in the Gospel of Luke, the story begins with Jesus showing up with a crowd of people, and he wants to get away a little bit so he can speak to the people. But Luke never tells us what he said. He never told us what he preached. And so I think to Luke, one of the important part was the actual part after he preached. So he asked Peter, let's go on out into the deep water and let's catch some fish. And it's Peter's response that I think is interesting that we need to learn from here. Pay attention. Luke wants us to hear this. He says, when he finished speaking to the crowds, he said to Simon, row out further into the deep water, drop your nets for a catch. It's kind of like Jesus knew it was going to happen. Now remember, the nets were just clean, right? Tackles all put away. And Jesus told them to go out in the water to throw their nets out in the daytime. And Peter's got to be thinking to himself, come on, man, really? Jesus, yeah, I know what you do, but you were raised a carpenter. You're not a fisherman. Stay in your own lane, bro. Right? That's what we say. Stay in your own lane. There's a reason we don't fish at night, that we fish at night instead of the day, because the fish can see the nets and they go away. And we're not going to catch anything now. I already know this. I bet that's what he's thinking. That's not exactly what he said. This is how Simon replied. He says, Simon replied, Master, we worked hard all night and we haven't caught a thing. Now listen, if you went to your friend and they've been out there fishing all day long and you found them at their boat and you're like, hey, dude, let's go out and fish some. And you said, listen, we've been fishing all night long. We haven't caught anything. What would you do? You'd be like, oh, I get it. How about another time? Sure, another time. All right, let's go grab a beer, whatever. That's what you would do, but not here. No, Jesus knows all of this and still asks him to go back out. And he does, but before he does, this is what Peter says. I love this line. This is one of the most important lines in this story. He says, but because you say so, talking to Jesus, I'll drop the nets. Because you say so, Jesus, I'll drop the nets. So he signals for the guys to grab up the nets, get in the boat, and to head out and to go fishing. This is the important line. This is the line that all of us growing up hated to hear from our parents. Why should I do this? Because I said so, right? But begrudgingly, he says, Jesus, because you say so. This is so important. You got to memorize this one. Write it down. Because you say so. Because here's what I know about you and what I know about me and why this is in the story. Peter is pushing back, but he doesn't realize it. There's this huge thing that's about to happen in his life. He can't even conceive it. He doesn't even know it's possible. All he can think at that moment is, I'm tired. I've cleaned up all of my stuff. I want to go grab a beer with the guys or go home, see my family, go to bed, and you drug me into church, and I had to sit behind you so I couldn't go to sleep, and now you have the audacity to want me to go back out. He can't see what's about to happen. And this has happened in my life many times. On December 19th, the year 2000, I remember this day. Because at that time, I've been working for the church for a while, and I'm the accountant, I'm the tax guy, I'm the business guy. I'm like the nerd of the church, by the way. It's a title that I love to wear. Any fellow nerds in the room? Right? Oh, man. But I'm the nerd of the church, and I am there, and on December 19th in the evening, I get a phone call from the secretary. And the secretary says, Ben, I got a phone call from a family. Their daughter was in a car wreck, and she's in very bad shape, and she's in the ICU at Freeman Hospital. And they've asked for somebody to go pray. And I'm like, well, then why didn't you call Aaron, right? Aaron's the pastor. He's the one that's theological. He knows how to pray for people. And Aaron actually had the gall that night to be at that same hospital and wouldn't go pray with her. I mean, yeah, they were having their first child at the moment. But still, right? He could have left. Or the secretary could have called Anna Jean Dye, See, Anna Jean was this lady who assisted the pastor, and she would go to the hospitals and she would see people. But no, for some reason, the secretary that night called me to go to the hospital, and I had all these reasons why I shouldn't do it. And inside, I rolled my eyes and I sighed. I said, whatever, okay, I'll do it. And I went and I met this family that had been to the church a few times. I didn't know them really. I heard the story about the car accident. I went to see their daughter, who was virtually unrecognizable as a person. And I sat there, and I didn't know what to say. Mom's crying, which made me cry. And took a big gulp. I talked some more, and I prayed. I don't even know what I prayed. And I wish I could tell you I prayed this wonderful, miraculous prayer. And she was healed the next day, but she wasn't. She died. But I know in that moment, I was able to pray some prayers that they were unable to do in that moment. I was able to be the presence of the church, the presence of God, as weird and messed up as I was. Somebody they needed. And it was in that moment that God showed me a little bit more about myself that I didn't know existed. That's what started all of this to be here. I wish I can say again, like she was cured, but she wasn't. And since that time, I remember it every time I go to the hospital. Pray with people time after time after time. I realized that night that God actually did have a calling on my life, that God can use me, my gifts, my talents, my screw-ups, my failures, to actually help lead people to an active faith in Jesus. Jesus was asking me for my boat, but here's the thing, is I could have easily missed it with 1,000 legitimate, good excuses. I almost missed the opportunity to be a blessing to a family who needed it the most. Listen, I want to encourage you, or that's too soft a word, man. I just want to dare you to do this. Do things that you feel like God is nudging you to do, even if you don't feel like it. Even if you roll your eyes and whatever, still do it. You know, do it. When Jesus is asking to borrow your boat or your time or your talents or your money or whatever it is, say, okay, God, here, it's yours. Maybe eventually you'll get to the point where it's like you feel great about it, but at the moment, if you're like, whatever, do it anyway. So here's the thing. The rest of the story with Peter goes like this. In the Gospel of Luke, it says they dropped their nets, and their catch was so huge that their nets were splitting. And then they signaled for their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they filled both boats then, so full that they were about to sink. And when Simon Peter saw the catch, he fell at Jesus' knees. And he said, leave me, Lord, for I'm a sinner. Let me ask you about this. In this moment, these fish come in, and it is freaking Peter out, right? Don't you think he should have seen something like this coming? I mean, what did Jesus do earlier, right? He healed his mother-in-law. God bless her soul. Did he not remember that? Sorry, I probably shouldn't chew ice. That's a bad habit. I never put ice in water, and so that's what I get. I mean, up until this point, he has seen Jesus do healings, but now all of a sudden he's in a boat and he is freaked out and he is scared of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus isn't just somebody who heals. Jesus can actually control nature and animals and help them get so many fish they're about to drown in it at a time when they're not supposed to catch fish. And so Peter is there and he's afraid, he's freaking out. And then Jesus simply says this to him, Peter, do not be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. You will fish for people. So, I want to wrap it up this way. To be a Christian or to follow Jesus, it's pretty simple. Jesus asks you to follow him. And he gives you a mission. And that mission is to fish for people. Jesus started a movement over 2,000 years ago. He started a movement to create the kingdom of God. And he started it with people like, of all people, Peter. And he's still doing the same thing today. But you need to know there's other movements out there. There's all sorts of movements. For instance, there's a guy by the name of Richard Spencer who's a white nationalist. He goes to college campuses recruiting people to start a movement. He's trying to start something. And a quote from him, he says this: "Equality, that's for losers. Greatness is what matters. Let's form a white nation and send the other people packing." That is him fishing for people. Do you see it? You will fish for people. You just get to choose what it is. Jesus is fishing for people. He wants you to join the movement. He wants you to live a life in such a way that people start to love God with all their heart and to love other people and actually have the audacity and the courage to love actual enemies of theirs as well. Take his message of the gospel, this love of God, to everybody you encounter, even at the convenience store or at the office next to you or sleeping in bed right next to you. You need to be on a mission. So let's fish for people. That's your task every single day. Every morning, just say something. God, here I am. Whatever I have, it's yours. Whatever you need to borrow, you can borrow it. And then you need to figure out how to represent Jesus in the world in such a way. As a pastor, I see one of my jobs in life, or my main job, is to be the best tasting worm on the hook every single day. And I know some days I don't look appetizing. But I'm to be the best tasting worm on the hook, and so are you. We're to be fishers of people. Why? Because you're here because somebody was a fisher of people. Somebody lived a life or said something to you that drew you to Jesus in some sort of way. And somebody did the same for them, and somebody did the same for them. That is our job. And today, that is the good news we can learn from the history of Peter, the regular guy that we now call saint. In the name of the Father, who created you, by the way, and the Son, who redeems you, like Nate sang about, and the Holy Spirit that sustains you.